webinar. This is Ann Rude with AVST Marketing. Today's session is Understanding Unified Messaging. We're going to be talking about Exchange and security options. Neil Butler, our Director of Sales Engineering, will be presenting, but before I turn it over to him, just want to draw your attention to a couple of our upcoming webinars, which are listed here. When we send the follow-up email on the webinar, we will include a link to how you can register for these if you're interested. And as always, we will make the slides available to you. You can actually download those from the handouts area on your webinar panel if you'd like to get those right away, or we'll send a link to them after the webinar. And in addition, we'll include a link to the recording. And one just last quick item, we are going to give away a set of Plantronics headphones. So after the webinar, we won't draw the name during the webinar, but if you're the lucky winner, you'll get an email from me later today. And best of luck to everyone. And then, of course, actually, I almost forgot, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, and you're welcome to type your questions in at any time during the webinar. And we'll let you know when it's time for the Q&A with Neil as he wraps us up. So, Neil, go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Ann, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending. This webinar is a very popular one with everything that's going on out in the world today. So it's nice to get it up in the rotation because I know there'll be a lot of interest. And usually there's a number of questions about it as well. So we're going to talk about unified messaging with Exchange, and not so much the functionality, because I think people have that piece down, but we're going to be focusing on the security aspect, because that tends to be where most of the questions pop up. And of course, we're pretty comfortable in the unified messaging market talking about it, and we actually started this all back in 1989. We were a couple of years in the market before anyone else and learned a lot from our customers, as much as anything else, about what they really wanted and what they needed. And we've kept that lead in the unified messaging market. If you go out and look at the Gartner document, you'll find they call us the best of breed dealer to use for unified messaging, and it's really because of our experience and our flexibility. We've been doing this for quite a long time. And we're doing it in the enterprise market. We started as a smaller company targeting smaller branch offices. That was quite a few years ago. We moved up into the enterprise space. Maybe 10, 15 years ago we started that movement. And now we're a pretty well-established player. If you look at the kind of customers we have, they're large customers. And the reason we do so well in a large customer environment is those are complex environments. And we're extremely agile in our ability to tailor the product and the solution to what's going on in the customer's enterprise. And that comes into play certainly when we start taking a look at unified messaging and at looking at the security side of it. We have a platform that really makes some of this easy. We were very lucky that we started this platform design in the very beginning, back in 1982. We started design. 85 we were selling the product, and even back then it had a 3-tier architecture, which meant we have a core engine that's been almost 30 years in development, making it rock solid. And on top of that, we run our applications modules, and underneath our interoperability, our connectivity to everything out there in that complex enterprise. So that sets us up to do an awfully good job regardless of what the enterprise looks like. And that certainly starts in the telephony world, since as a call processing unified communications platform, our primary connection point, of course, is the phone system. Most everything we do has to do with phone calls and messages. And we've been doing this such a long time, we pretty much have it down. We integrate to more systems out there with our own native integrations than anyone else does. And that's great for people today because that telephony infrastructure is a very, very flexible piece of an enterprise right now. There's a lot going on, and a lot of you will know what's kind of going on with the various vendors out there right now, meaning you have equipment today you may be interested in keeping those assets in play, and we're great at that because we work with all the older TDM type systems, and we'll continue to do so. You might also be thinking about upgrading into a voice over IP environment, and that's great because we do that as well. So you can feel very comfortable that if you implement our solutions in your current environment, there won't be a huge cost for a forklift upgrade to get in, and everything our product does, it does in every one of those environments, legacy or not. And when the time comes for you to move forward into a different environment, and that might be enterprise voice over IP, that might be something hosted in the cloud, you can be very, very comfortable that our solution will just be reprogrammed and work in that new environment with all the effective tools that it has today. And of course, the interoperability carries over to the groupware piece, which is kind of where we're focusing this webinar on. And unified messaging, we have more flexibility than anyone out there, bar none. None of our competitors even argue about that. We can connect to your enterprise systems, whether it's Exchange or Notes. We're probably the last person out there that has a native integration to Notes. We do IMAP integrations to everything out there. But when the time comes when you might look at the cloud, we also have integrations for the current cloud offerings as well. And it's very painless to move. Let's say you're on Exchange and you're going to migrate to Office 365. It's very painless on our system to move your users even a few at a time without any real noticeable changes on their part. Besides the pieces we're going to talk about today, besides the actual unified messaging, we have a lot of other solutions that run on this platform. Our platform is a little different than those that our competitors offer in that we have this application that does everything we're going to talk about today plus some of the other things. And you don't buy new servers. Ours is not a world where we kind of bolted on other applications, which is what most of our competitors have. On our platform, you can actually walk in the door and install our platform on a single physical server, and just with licensing, you can add every feature we have, and they're all integrated. So our speech rec automated attendant knows about our call management system, which knows about our unified messaging, and the way they're integrated means they're easy to deploy, they're really easy to maintain with a single admin client for all the features, and they're easy to use, and that's the most important piece. As you look at moving to unified communications, one of the biggest risks is that you spend a good deal of money for a solution that people won't use. Because if it's not integrated, if it's very complex and they have to figure out how to use this, and they have to be an active participant in changing things during their work week, you'll just find that that software is not going to work. And we have really worked to get around that. We drive almost all of our applications on context, and that context comes from other applications in the enterprise, and we require very little of the users. So unified messaging is what we're going to talk about today. And today, unified messaging is actually fairly well understood. I told you we started this market years and years ago, and I did many presentations to rooms full of totally blank faces when I tried to explain about putting voice messages into the email system and things along those lines. It was just a little bit too new for people. But it's a very well-known technology, very proven. Almost every study that you could find in the last 10 years has shown the increase in employee productivity and customer satisfaction that comes from delivering all of your messaging types to your users wherever they are and whatever tool they want to use. And those tools, they're probably the most flexible piece out there these days if you think about it. When unified messaging started, we took a message and we turned on a message waiting light, and the user called in from the phone and got that message. And that was, you know, we didn't realize it then, but that was a very simple world because there's just two things involved, the phone system and our platform, and it was easy to deliver every feature that we could think of back then. It's much more complex now. Not only do we hook to more than the phone system for unified messaging, because we also hook to, you know, the email system, several of the groupware pieces like the calendar, the presence engine, all of that comes into play, and there's more than one of every of those out there that we have to integrate with. So it's a much more complex environment. But the concept is still the same, productivity to the user, regardless of the device they're on. And the device might be their computer at their desktop, might be their iPad, sitting in a coffee shop somewhere. It might be their mobile phone audio connection when they're driving. We have a full hands-free suite that allows unified messaging to happen in all of those environments. And we offer the full suite of functionality. So the typical access to your messages from all the different clients, the ability to integrate fax into that if that's something that you're interested in, voicemail to text through a third-party service, text-to-speech so you can listen to your emails over the phone if that's the tool you've chosen, and then of course all of this has to be secure. That's one of the biggest challenges today, and of course that's what we're focusing on in this webinar. And the reason that's become an issue is the way information is looked at has changed over the years. And if you go back 15, 20 years ago, almost none of this concern over information storage, things like discovery, were really even around. The first one I became aware of was Sarbanes-Oxley. Of course, we know where that came from in the early days. Not only affected larger corporations, but it was a scary thing for those corporations to suddenly be told that you needed to retain all of your electronic communications and make those available for discovery in the event of some sort of legal issue. And immediately that became a concern, and then suddenly people were talking about putting voice messages into the email store for convenience, because that really does make it easier on the users. And now there's the concern, well, what does that mean if I put my voicemail into my email? Does that mean I have to now save those as well? Are those subject to discovery? What if I don't put those messages in there? And my traditional voicemail, when I delete them, they're gone. Am I in violation of something there? And then besides just discovery, there's quite a bit of concern over confidentiality. HIPAA became a very strong influencer in the healthcare industry, and HIPAA was very clear on some things what you had to do, and kind of left a general and best behavior clause where if we come and audit you, you better be able to tell us you've made best efforts to handle these kind of issues. So now people were just very concerned and quite a bit confused, I think, in the beginning in terms of what do I do with these voice messages? I want my users to have access to them from all these devices because that's just an incredible boon. Mobile people in particular have a lot of challenges, and we can take that one off the list if we could just figure out where to store the messages. And in the early days, people took a side. They stored the messages on the email server or not. But it became apparent fairly early in that game that one solution wasn't going to do it. You had to have many solutions to offer the customer, and you had to be very flexible about how you did it. So we're going to look at our deployment options because we have the widest range out there, and we're pretty comfortable having any kind of discussion with a prospective customer in terms of unified messaging storage. And one of the reasons is, along the way, as well as being flexible, we have figured out the secure piece. It is very important, regardless whether this is a retention and corporate trade secrets or HIPAA or FERPA for higher ed with student confidentiality. It's very clear that those voice messages have to be well guarded. So we've done a lot of things. We've done things like private messages. If a user sends you a message and marks it private, we can see that it can't be forwarded externally or internally, no matter where you're storing it. Even if you're storing it in your email inbox, we have a way to make it so that can't get out and can't really go anywhere. Our clients are extremely secure. Both our web client and our mobile client give the users access to their messages from just about every kind of device you can imagine, and they can basically do exactly what they can do over the phone. In other words, they can play that message, they can delete it, they can forward it to another user on the system, they can save it. What they can't do is get a copy of it out of the system. There's no file attachment save, there's no cache copy that a smart user could go find on their device somewhere. And since we download and play or stream and play the messages, there's no copies even on the device. So if you leave your mobile phone sitting at Starbucks and walk away, and somebody picks it up and goes to that screen where messages are, they aren't going to be able to. Without logging into that app, they aren't going to be able to. If they steal that device and try and crack it, once again, nothing stored on the device. And we've gone as far as decrypt those messages when they're on the wire. So we do both TLS and RTP to make those connections secure, even within the enterprise, between the phone system and our server. Probably the first thing we did was we made our password stronger than just a few digits. And now we have a strong password tool that an administrator can use to block simple passwords, make it so your password can't be 1234, make it so it can't be your mailbox number. So on the security side, we've spent a lot of time with making sure that if the customer decides they know how they want to deploy it, that they can feel comfortable when they deploy it, that those messages remain a corporate asset and not out in the world running free. So we found early on that the mobile client is really one of the biggest challenges, and so we built a mobile client application. We have one for iPhone or iOS, and we have one for Google. And they're very, very, very popular. Our clients do a lot of things, In fact, you can take one of our webinars on availability to get kind of a full look at what our mobile client does, and some of it's pretty amazing. But just the messaging piece, which of course you'd expect as a messaging company, we would have messages on the mobile phone, and we do. But as we talked about, they're secure. So you can see the screenshot here. I'm looking at messages on my phone. That's actually header information, and I touch that message and open it up, and when I click play, that message is downloaded, played, and then as soon as I leave that message screen, it's deleted. So there's no copies on there at all. And even our credentials for our phones are such that while you set up our messaging, you have to put your credentials in so that phone can get into your mailbox, but we don't store the credentials on the phone. We really don't want somebody to be able to get a phone and crack it and get a user's credentials. So what we do when they log in and they enter their credentials is we create a security token, an encrypted security token that's on their phone, and that's what they use for access when the phone connects to the servers. So highly secure and very easy to control. The administrator can kill that token at any time. They can set it up so the user has to refresh their tokens on regular intervals. The security side for the mobile piece has really been thought out. We're probably in about our 4th version in terms of the security features for those mobile devices. Probably the biggest concern you're going to find is where the messages are stored. And this is because while it's not really clear in terms of retention and what's required on voice messages specifically, everyone has a pretty strong opinion on that. And what we've tried to do is set it up so the customers can deploy this in such a way that it meets what they believe their requirements are. The most full-featured way to do unified messaging is to put those voice messages into the email store. And the reason is, as a customer, you spend a lot of money on your infrastructure, and you've got a groupware package there that is cornerstone to how everyone works, both at their desk and mobile. So you've made sure that the tools are in play for them to be able to get to those messages and that calendar and all that functionality wherever they are from any device. So if we put our voice messages in there, we get to ride along with that. You'll get your messages from your email client in your regular inbox, click on them, and play them. If you're doing Outlook web access or iNotes or some sort of web access to your mail server, if those messages are on the mail server, you can now get them from those clients as well. If you're doing something like cached mode on your laptops, where you're taking your messages with you when you go off net, now you'll have your voicemail messages. So there's really very little doubt that that's the most robust way to deliver unified messaging. And for some people, some entire companies or some people within a company, that's the method they would choose. So we can do that on a user-by-user basis. We can define where the message store is, and maybe we'll look at, like for healthcare, we might see that management and infrastructure people, the IT department, they'll deploy their messages this way because they have no confidential functionality. They have no patient information ever going to be in their mailboxes, so they're comfortable with that. And the same thing, of course, holds true if your email happens to be in the cloud. There's really no need to change the way you're thinking about that. We still can put the messages up into the user's mailbox and leverage that full infrastructure. In the early days, the second choice was to leave the messages on the voicemail system and then access them with the email client, but they're never actually in the email store. This was really popular in the early days, not so much for security, because but back then the size of a voice message, which is probably around 250 to 280K, back then would fill up a user's mailbox and would fill up the message store. I'm pretty comfortable today for most of us. If you click on the little attachment icon in email, bring all your attachments to the top of your mailbox and look at their sizes, voice messages are trivial now. So this particular method is not the most popular. We still have people that use it, we still support it, but because even though the messages aren't on the server, there's nothing to stop a user within the email client from dragging a message from the inbox that's looking at their voicemail over into their email, and that message will actually end up moved. So now we're back to those same issues about confidentiality, compliance, having voicemail in the email. So this is not a very popular method. What has become probably the most popular method is what we call secure unified messaging, which says leave the messages on our server, access those messages with our clients, our web client and our mobile client. And as we discussed, those are highly secure clients. You're not going to have any issues with like a HIPAA audit, because what those clients do is exactly what the telephone interface does. So unless all voicemail in the world violates HIPAA, then these clients don't violate it either. And this is very easy to deploy. We have an application, it gets loaded on one of the customer web servers, and now it's just a matter of figuring out whether you keep it inside the firewall, expose it outside, etc., and users can now get to their voice messages. And the clients, the web client and the mobile client both, besides doing messaging, do a lot of other things that really help the productivity of the users. And we have other webinars that talk about those pieces. The last piece we have is not really so much unified messaging, although we call it simplified unified messaging. This is really more of a very powerful message notification tool. So when we get a message, a user can be configured such that we'll push an email out telling them they have a new voicemail. And there'll be information in the email saying, here you have a new voicemail message, it's from John Tyler, and have various other information about their mailbox. In that template for that, it can also have a link that if you hit it, it takes you automatically to Web Phone Manager, so you can get that message. Or it could have a telephone number, so if you access that email from your phone, highlight that phone number and call in and get your messages automatically. As an option, you can include a copy of that voicemail message along with that email. So that email now has a WAV file attachment, just a standard WAV file, that is attached, and now you can play it from any device basically that you're handling your email from. It is a copy. There's still the main message back at the host on our server, so you do have to handle them differently. If you delete that from your email, you've deleted the copy, the other message is still there. Likewise, if you call in over the phone and delete it, that message in email will still be there. So we don't really consider this truly unified messaging, but it kind of fits that bill. This is a nice niche tool. If you have 100 contractors in your building for a major redo, and you would like to be able to give them a voicemail box and then deliver it through their email, this is the kind of thing that's very easy to deploy. There's no license required for simplified unified messaging or secure unified messaging. Likewise, there's no license required for a user on our system. So as long as you have the right number of ports to handle your traffic, you can add as many users as you like, and every one of them can be simplified unified messaging or secure unified messaging. Where this really comes into play in our world the most is, like I say, the compliance issue. If a customer is looking at using Skype for Business, which means they're using Exchange for their unified messaging system, or they're using some other phone system and Exchange for their unified messaging system, we have the ability to leave that customer's Exchange alone. They still are going to use Exchange, but instead of adding the unified messaging functionality to the Exchange server, they're going to add it to our server. And once again, this can be done on a user-by-user basis. You don't have to do all users. So particularly in a Skype deployment where most customers we talk to are just not comfortable for all users having their voicemail messages in Exchange, we're just a natural addition to those, whereas we can let them go ahead and get whatever benefits they want from Skype, and Skype for Business can be their phone system, and we still will control that messaging functionality in a way that makes it easier, frankly, for that sale to happen. As we talk to customers about unified messaging, we don't really talk very much anymore about functionality because it's been around a long now. People have either used it or kind of know what it is. What comes up are what the industry calls the 5 C's. Compliance. There are corporate requirements, legal requirements that a customer has to understand and has to take into consideration, and we'll discuss those. We won't give advice on what they are. We have no idea, what the law really says in those areas, but we will, if they say, well, our reading of the law says we can't put them in voicemail, then we can have that conversation about what their other options are. Confidentiality is the same kind of conversation. There are things, and some of them are very well known, like HIPAA with patient information, and FERPA is the federal one for student information. But there's a lot of other ones. Once again, we can't comment on what's required, but if you're worried about confidentiality, we can talk about what we can do about that, which is different types of unified messaging implementation, restrict secure messages, private messages, all of those are possible on our system. And then configuration, it's good to know, what's your architecture going to look like, both now and maybe, where you're going in the next couple of years. If you already sort of have a 5-year plan, unified messaging, any discussions you have on unified messaging should have that plan in there. You should make sure what you're spending money on today will take you forward into the future. Capacity, there's a lot of things that go on in email, and under capacity we also tend to talk about just connectivity, where we have to connect your email servers. Where are they? How can we get to them? What type of latency do you have? Those tend to be very important discussions. And then the last piece, which is part of any kind of application sale, of course, is cost. And it's more than just what it costs to buy it. Down the road, there are implications, like if you buy one system and you're moving maybe to Skype next year, that kind of thing. You really have to think about what it costs to buy it today, and also what it costs to go forward. How easy is it to maintain? Will your users understand it enough to get the advantage from it? That's a lot of information when you start looking at unified messaging. As I said, we've been doing it for quite a while. So out of the kindness of our hearts, we have built a unified messaging checklist, which is basically just all the things you consider. It's really not about our product specifically. It simply says, make sure when you're looking at purchasing a system for unified messaging, you look at these categories. And as part of coming to this webinar, you will get a copy of this unified messaging checklist sent to you, and you can just look through it, and just gives you a little thing to think about when you start having those conversations with vendors. And as always, we come to the very favorite slide, the end. And hopefully we have some questions.
Yeah, there are a few. Thanks so much, Neil. If you'd like to submit a question and you haven't done that yet, use the orange arrow in the upper corner of your screen, which will expand the options, and then you should see the question box toward the bottom. Neil, first question, does AVST recommend a specific type of or is one of them most popular?
Well, we never recommend one just off the top of our heads, because there's so much within each enterprise that's different that really would have to do with that decision. So before we would recommend, we would want to know what their concerns are. We would want to have basically all the discussions that are on that checklist to make sure we understood what the customer was. And then we certainly give guidance. What we can't do is say, oh, in your industry, it's okay if you put your voice messages in Exchange. Yeah, we can't do that piece. That's a very complicated world out there in terms of e-documents and retention and discovery. So all we can do is help the customer match whatever it is they think they need. In terms of popular, I have to say Secure right now is the most popular. And there's a number of reasons for it. First of all, it's secure, and that's a concern for everybody. Secondly, it's ridiculously easy and inexpensive to deploy, because you basically put the software on the web server and you're done. There's no client touch that has to be done. It's a GUI that's very self-intuitive. There's really no training that has to be done for it. And people just like the fact that because it's a web tool, you have that flexibility of, I can get to it when I go home from my machine at home. I can open it up on various other applications. So that's a popular tool. So that would be the most popular version.
Okay, next question. Did you say the message store can be different for different groups of users?
That's one of the things we came across really early on was, we originally thought, well, a customer will say, well, here's what we want. And it turned out, because of all the different conditions that affect where the message store is and what tools there were a lot of different requirements within almost every enterprise. It's, the way you're going to handle messaging is different. If you're a desk worker and you come in and you work 8 to 5 and you only work from your desk, that's one set of conditions that might determine how you deployed Whereas if you spend all your time on the road, if you're a technician or a salesperson, and you almost never use anything except your mobile devices, that's another set of requirements. So early on, we basically laid it out so that on a user-by-user basis, or class of service basis, to make it a little easier, we can have any and all of those versions. And you can not only mix them from users, but a user might choose to have both secure, so they can get their messages, from the web client, and simple, so they can push them to their personal account at home when they're over the weekend, so they don't have to get into their corporate account. So yes, user by user, you're able to do that. Now, server-based where we store the messages in the email server, whether it's in the enterprise or the cloud, and client-based, where we leave the messages on our system but the user gets them from their email client, each of those requires a license for the user. But simplified and secure do not. So you have to kind of decide which you want to deploy for which users and count those up, and then that'll be part of the purchase process.
Okay. Next question. Do you support Touch ID for accessing the app on iOS and or Android?
No, not at this time. Right now we have a couple of methods. We will, on the browser, support single sign-on if you're using ADFS. So if you've already signed on to your computer, when you go to our web phone manager, we'll pass the credentials, and we'll do that. And we do support the security token on the mobile client, but right now we're not doing anything with touch.
Okay, there is one more question about getting access to the slides. And so those are in the handouts area. And just as a reminder, we will send you all a follow-up email today with the checklist Neil mentioned, a link to the slides again in case you aren't able to get to them here, and then, of course, the link to the recording in case you need to review any of the content. And then there is one more question. Let's see. So secure is separate from full
So full is not really a term that the industry uses. Server-based is the probably the most full-featured version where you store messages in the Exchange server. Secure says we leave the messages on our server and you get to them through our secure clients. Hopefully that answers that.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So I'm just doing a quick scroll here. It looks like that covers the question. Once again, we'll send you that follow-up email with the additional information. And of course, we want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. It's extremely great to have people actually join this one. And as Neil mentioned, the topic has actually been quite popular. So based on our attendance today, that continues to be the case. So I'll go ahead and let Neil give his parting words as well.
Thank you, Ann. Well, we always appreciate when you show up for these. It's a great chance for us to get, a time to tell a little bit of our story. Hopefully you find them useful, and you'll let us know that. You can always get back to us at info@avst.com and tell us you like the webinars, you wish they were longer, you wish they were shorter, you wish somebody else but me would give them because you're tired of my voice. Any of those, any kind of feedback at all will be gladly accepted, and we really do listen to that because there's no use of us being here if we're not giving you what you want. Thank you.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.